Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call our meeting to order. I'm going to read our land acknowledgement and then move forward through to attendance. So we acknowledge that we are on land and surrounded by water, originally inhabited by indigenous peoples who have traveled this area since time immemorial. This territory is within the lands honored by the Wampum Treaties, agreements between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenni Lenape, and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Specifically, we would like to acknowledge the presence of the Three Fires Confederacy, Ojibwe, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Huron-Wendat peoples. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture while remaining committed to moving forward respectfully with all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. I've got all trustees in attendance. We have regrets from Trustee Olmsted, and we have Trustee Burgess on the phone with us this evening. I would like to say that this is our last Education Committee meeting of this organizational year, and it's as if Trustee Olmsted and I maybe had a bit of forethought, and we themed this year Challenge as Opportunity, and we have certainly had Challenge as Opportunity this year. I want to give a thank you to Dr. Claire Howitt, to Anna Pavia for her help, to my vice chair, Amy Olmsted, who unfortunately couldn't be here, and to the entire programs team for all their help this year and all of their extraordinary efforts this year, not just in this regard, but in regards across the system. So thank you very much for that. So moving through to approval of the agenda. Can I get a mover? Trustee Leclerc is seconded by Trustee Cook. Thank you so much. Do we have any discussion? All in support? Thank you.
Burgess.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of conflict of interest for in here? Seeing none. We'll move down to approval of the minutes. And this is from October 6th. I see moved by Trustee Hatfield, seconded by Trustee Leclerc. Do we have any discussion? And all in support? That's it. Thank you very much. Any business arising from the minutes? Trustee Halberstadt?
Yeah, I just had a couple questions held over from the presentation of the last Education Committee meeting. On page 17, there is it was a summer school report. I think Superintendent Canty could answer this. 27 students from other school boards coming to the GECDSB. I'm wondering if if the funding comes with them, or how does that work?
Yes, they would be funded through the ministry as students in our board.
Okay, so do the other boards all have summer school too, or you don't? Anybody know that? Yes.
Some boards have summer school, most do, some do not.
Okay. Also, I had a similar question on summer school, and that is the comment on page 17 again about it's amazing how in just a few weeks we were able to get a full high school credit. How many weeks would that be that you could get a credit? I was kind of surprised you get a credit in a couple months. And,
It's a 4-week program, and they're there all day. It's virtually this year. It's synchronous and asynchronous, but it's a grade 10 Discovering the Workplace credit that the students receive.
Okay, so it only takes four weeks to get the credit?
Yes, because they're there all day, and so they get enough hours in to get the credit.
Thank you.
Can I get your mic, Trustee Halberstadt?
Oh.
Do we have any other business arising from the minutes? I had one, and it was just in regards to, we had some discussion around correspondence students, and I think I was unclear how, what this switch was, or do we have any, what is the number of students switching to correspondence, and do we have any risks about their engagement or moving forward? Do we how are we kind of addressing those maybe those new students who are moving into correspondence? And sorry, just if we could, just as a matter of allowing maybe Carl to adjust the cameras, if we could announce who's going to speak, or if you could come through me and then I will announce so that Carl can follow those. So if this is going to be Superintendent Mills.
Sure. We are not fully done with the numbers for the virtual school right now, and we're finalizing that over the next couple days. Class list will be completed, and all of our staff will be moved to the appropriate placements. So I can follow up with you to give you that information, but I can't give you an accurate tally at this particular moment.
That's fair. Thank you. I'd really appreciate that follow-up. Dr. Kelly.
Yeah, I wonder if Superintendent Howell could speak to perhaps the engagement issue, which I think was the second part of your question. Dr. Howell?
Thank you. So the teachers are working really hard to engage families on a weekly basis, at least 2 times a week. Where there have been issues with connecting with families, we do follow-up and work very closely with Dr. Pike's department to ensure safety of students and to try to re-engage them.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Okay, so we'll move through to our presentations. We have 2 presentations tonight, and lucky for us, we have 2 guests who will be joining us to assist in those presentations. Our first one is supporting English language learners, and that will be with Superintendent Howitt and also Jan Foy, who is joining us remotely.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here tonight with teacher consultant Jan Foy to present to you on supports that we have in the district for English language learners. So in our district, we follow the ministry definition for English language learners, which is a student who arrives with a first language other than English and requires support in learning English. We do have students that do arrive being able to speak their native language and English, but they must have a need to learn English to be considered an ELL. We have also adopted the ministry's vision for ELLs, and you'll see it on the screen, but essentially it's an asset-based perspective where we're seeing that all students that come to us from different countries come with gifts, whether they've had schooling or they've not had schooling. The premise of the program is that they learn the curriculum and the language at the same time. And that it's important for them to see themselves in the learning environment. So many of our resources are reflective of students from around the world, and that we value their culture, and we create conditions for the students to foster confidence and be able to express their opinions, and that they have a voice as well as their family. And we set high expectations with appropriate supports for them and provide opportunities for students to select various pathways based on their strengths or interests. So who is an English language learner? They're either Canadian born or they're newcomers. So Canadian born are children who are born in Canada or have Canadian parents living abroad who've applied for Canadian citizenship for their children, but their first language is other than English. Newcomers, there's 3 groups of newcomers. They are children who arrive as part of a planned process. Their family has looked into the country, decided the city, and they're able to then return to their home country without problem. The second group are refugees with a very different experience. They leave due to civil unrest, and sometimes they leave their country just a couple days knowing the country that they're going to, and in most cases they're unable to return to their home country. And then the third group is international students. We have a newcomer welcome center, and newcomers arrive from countries where their official language is other than English. They complete an English and a math assessment at the Newcomer Welcome Center. It's located at 443 Olette Avenue, which is also the home of the elementary virtual school offices. On the screen, you'll see that we've welcomed students from 58 countries this last year. You'll see the top 10 countries in the last year. And over the last 10 years, we've welcomed children from about 70 countries from around the world. This slide, it's updated from the slide I originally sent you. There was an error in it. This one is showing the newcomer assessments, elementary and secondary, for the initial assessment. And between 2015 and 16 and 2017 and 18, we welcomed many newcomers from Syria. But prior to 2014-15, on average, the initial assessments in our district were about 400. So you can see that there was a significant increase with the influx of students starting in 2015-16. You'll also notice that due to COVID-19, between March 17th and the end of the school year, there were no assessments conducted. And I'm going to pass it over to Jan to talk about the BICS and the CALP.
Good. Thank you, Clara. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. You'll see on your screen, it shows you the second language acquisition, and it takes 5 to 7 years for students to learn or to become proficient in the English language. They're really learning two different types of language skills. They're learning their social skills, which is termed the basic interpersonal communication skills, and their academic language, which is called the cognitive academic language proficiency. So the social language they can develop in the first 1 or 2 years, and that's because it's very easy to learn. It's face-to-face. There's a lot of visual cues. It's repeated. You see it every day and everywhere in life. Whereas that academic language takes 5 years or more for students to develop. It's that language, that specific academic vocabulary that's a lot more complex and is less familiar, and it's very abstract. It's not the type of language you hear outside of school or outside of that classroom. You don't hear students talking about linear relationships and patterns on the playground. They only hear that kind of language in the classroom. So it takes them a long time. So students require support across these 5 years, and sometimes it takes them longer depending on their literacy skills in their first language. ELLs will either be supported in an ESL, English as a Second Language program, or ELD, English Literacy Development Program, depending on their prior learning and literacy skills. So ELLs who've developed age-appropriate first language literacy skills, they would attend an ESL class. We don't need to teach them how to read, since they have developed those literacy skills in the first language. They can just transfer over those skills into learning English. For example, a grade 6 student who arrives and has attended school all of his life in his home country and has developed those age-appropriate literacy skills in his first language, then he would attend an ESL program. On the other hand, if a grade 6 student came with limited prior schooling and not had those opportunities to develop literacy skills in his first language, then that student would require an ELD program. And in this case, the student is learning not just English, but they're also learning how to read and write in a second language, which is quite challenging, and it takes them a little bit longer. So we provide both of these programs in elementary and secondary. We currently have 21 ESL 21 ESL teachers that are face-to-face in 16 of our elementary schools. And we're going to have 4 elementary ESL teachers in virtual schools starting in Quadmester 2. In elementary, the ELLs are in the ESL, ELD classroom for English and math if needed, and then they attend their homeroom classes for the other content areas. The ESL coaches work with teachers in the classroom to support those students as well. In secondary, we have our Magnet ESL ELD schools, which are Westview, Leamington, Kennedy, and Herman. Now, Kennedy and Herman only offer the ESL courses, whereas Westview and Leamington offer the ELD. So when students arrive in secondary, the assessor determines the level of English proficiency and their appropriate ESL or ELD course. So they would take one of 5 courses along the ESL continuum, either level A to level E. And these are considered their English courses. We also have sheltered courses in ESL or in our secondary program for those students A and B. Those sheltered courses are they provide the content of the subject, but really focuses on that academic language of the course. Our board has partnered with the New Canadian Centre of Excellence, who oversees the settlement workers in schools. SWIS support our families with their settlement needs, such as completing applications, driver's license, finding housing, and they also provide sessions for families and students on various topics, such as our educational system. They have really been a blessing to us, especially during COVID, because they've really provided all that interpretation and translation services for us and our families. And I don't know what we would have done without them. And these are our other settlement services or settlement agencies in the community. They all provide the settlement services and language training and employment services and youth services for our children and for our families. We have translation and reading tools available in schools as well. We use the MS Translator when communicating with families and students. It is an app on our iPads and iPhones with over 70 languages, and that it can translate voice and text in real time. Our Microsoft PowerPoint in Office 365 can transcribe words as you present and display them on a screen using the subtitles. So I can show a PowerPoint and I can put the subtitles into another language, such as Mandarin. And so as I'm speaking, it'll come out in Mandarin so my audience can see and they can read it in their first language. Our Microsoft Lens acts like a scanner. It scans text and uploads it into the immersive reader, which then reads the text. And our immersive reader, it highlights words while reading and has that translation capability as well. It also has a picture dictionary, so you can click on a word and a picture is displayed for the word. So immersive reader is on our Microsoft Word, our OneNote, and our MS Lens currently. We also have monolingual and dual language picture dictionaries in different content areas for grades 1 and 12. And we also have leveled novels for our ESL and ELD courses in secondary. In our virtual library, we have the Gale database that has text for grades 1 to 12 on subject-specific topics. It also includes the translation feature, so articles and text can be translated into various languages. A virtual library also includes the Pebble Go, which has fiction and nonfiction text for grades 1 to 3, with read-aloud feature with videos and visuals to accompany the text. And BookFlix also provides read-aloud features for their storybooks. Our school libraries also carry a large collection of diverse books to make our students feel welcomed. And we also have some dual language picture books as well. The Level Literacy Intervention has been a very valuable resource for our ELLs, as it has shown to really move our ELLs up in their DRA levels. There is about 120 to 130 lessons in each kit. It is a very intensive small group literacy intervention. The books are very engaging. That's what the students really like about it. It consists of a variety of fiction and nonfiction text. The lessons are sequential to allow for appropriate scaffolding. And you can see on your screen there, it aligns with on the diagnostic reading assessment and the grade. So all of our high-intensity schools currently have the green and blue kit, and some also have the orange and red. We now have 53 elementary schools that have at least one of the kits. And our coaches are currently out there providing training to staff right now for the next few weeks.
Thank you, Jan. And so, as I mentioned earlier, because of the large influx of students in 2015, at one point we received over 900 students in a very, very short period of time. It gave us the opportunity to look at the work that we were doing in the system and if we could improve that work. And what we found with that large influx of students, it was just tremendous in the system. We noticed that there was an overload in the operations in our magnet schools because students were being transported to different schools. And so we expanded from 6 to 13 ESL support teachers. We had 10 to 20, we moved from 10 to 20 ESL teachers. We started adding itinerant teachers, but that wasn't building the capacity of staff to be able to address the needs of students. And that we were also finding that the program that we were offering was not necessarily aligning with contemporary research. So what we did is we engaged in a review of our ESL programs, and what we did is we created a sample questionnaire or survey after we worked with administrators, ESL teachers, itinerants, and newcomer staff. Then we administered that survey after we worked with our union partner as to the process that we were following. We also connected with community agencies such as the Newcomer Center of Excellence, the Windsor Women Working with Immigrant Women, the W5, and the YMCA and the Multicultural Center to gather their input and perspective. And we worked with 4 boards that had a similar profile that we have, like Thames Valley, like Hamilton Wentworth, like Ottawa Carleton, and Peel, to see if what we were doing were comparable to boards with a similar profile. We also conducted focus groups with students, and we asked their opinions about the work that was happening in school and the impact on them and their learning. We talked with parents. We met with them actually at the W5, where they were learning languages classrooms. They felt safe in that area, and they welcomed us there to engage in focus group conversations. And then we looked at contemporary research, and we also looked at our transportation services because we were transporting students all over to these magnet schools, and we looked to see if that was demonstrating good stewardship. So what did our data find is that generally all of our stakeholders felt that students felt welcome within the district, and that they were also happy with the process at the Newcomer Welcome Center. But we found that there were areas of opportunity to improve. We found that about 1/3 of our teachers didn't have access to the reports, the detailed reports that were being created at the center. So we're like, okay, we need to clean that up. And we have our coaches, once those reports come in, work with teachers to understand what the recommendations are, and then the coach can work with the teacher to support them in that work. Students were reporting to us that they felt that the work in schools were sometimes too easy. And remember that conversation that if it's too easy, they get bored. If it's too hard, it creates anxiety. So we follow Vygotsky's theory of that zone of proximal development. So we had to find that zone for the kids, and working with the STEP and working with the LLI is helping us to meet that sweet spot, if you will. We found that there was lack of collaboration time for the teachers to work with the ESL teachers and with the coaches. And we also felt that our communities were telling us that we needed to integrate students more. And that was a really loud message that they gave us, and that we found that other boards were not doing magnet programs like we had been doing. So we also looked at the research, and the research said, contemporary research said we needed to do more integration. And as soon as that was one of the changes that we made, it was instantaneous, the amount of English the students were speaking when we changed to a fully integrated model in their home school. So the recommendations essentially were to have ELL students remain in their home school, to add ELD, ESL instructional coaches to support students from grade 1 to 8, and to have up to a half-day program depending on the need of the student if they were a step 1 or step 2, where they could get more personalized instruction in either literacy or mathematics. And then we added an ELL management system, which I absolutely love, because at the stroke of a key, it tells us where the students are at, their step, how long they've been in program. So it also finds if there's anomalies and we might need to do different things for students. And then we aligned our coaches to the highest intensity schools. And I'm just going to pass it over to Jan for a moment to talk about the STEP continuum.
Thank you, Clara. One of the ministry's policies is that we are to track and monitor the English proficiency of students as well as their academic skills. So we use the ministry-developed steps to English proficiency for grades 1 to 12. You'll see it up here on the screen, and you'll see that it's tracked along step 1 to step 6. The one you see up there is the oral grades 4 to 6. We have also for we have a step for all divisions, primary, junior, intermediate, and secondary. And we track on 3 different skills, the oral, reading, and writing. So what we do is that how it helps us is that it helps us, first of all, to plan for our ELL. So we can make the appropriate adaptations to lessons based on a student's step. So if I'm making adaptations for a student, a Step 1 student, it looks very differently than a Step 3 student. We also track our students' language proficiency on, as Clara mentioned, on our ELL management system. The ministry designed STEP with the thought that students would complete one step per year. So that's why, we really need to track them to see are they making those increases every year. And if they're not, then we need to possibly move in and do some further interventions with those students.
Thank
We
you,
also have an ELD step continua that tracks students along 4 steps. And after they complete step 4, then they move on to the ESL step continua. So all of our coaches and ESL teachers in elementary panel have pretty much trained now in the ESL and ELD step continua. We were starting to work last year with the secondary, but unfortunately, due to COVID, we had to kind of put everything on pause, but we're getting it up and running this year and getting our secondary students also on step.
Thank you, Jan. I appreciate that. And so my favorite slide, this shows the progress with students. And so you'll see that hundreds of students are moving on the STEP continuum. Some of them are moving in more than one strand, which is awesome. And you'll see that for 2019-20, it's only till February assessments. So I'm looking forward to additional assessments to see growth with students. But this is giving us idea that there's rapid growth happening with our ELL students. We also conducted a secondary review, followed the similar process in terms of consulting with groups, including our union partner, OSSTF. And our data findings were very similar to the elementary students. They love the diversity in our schools. That came loud and clear in our secondary schools as well. So our recommendations were we needed to find ways of integrating the ESL students for at least a part of the day, that they weren't just in sheltered courses, that the teachers were asking for professional development, and that we needed to ensure that the reports were shared with the teachers, all the appropriate teachers at the secondary school, and that we needed to start implementing STEP in the secondary school in an ELL management system. And as Jan mentioned, because of sanctions and COVID, that was put on pause, but we've picked up the baton and we're working to do that this year. We'd be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jan. Do trustees have any questions? Oh, no questions. I have some. My question is around the magnet schools and kind of the combined with that feeling of home that students were talking about, and how that was kind of more emotionally managed, the feeling of moving those students back to their home school and their feeling of how they established home in that new school.
So, and that was a big message that came out in the research, is that it was best for them to remain in their school, part of their school community, could take part with extracurricular activities. So it made a big difference immediately as soon as we initiated that, instead of a student having to get on a bus and go to a specific program at a school.
I did have one more question about what we're seeing, and I know we probably have just very preliminary reports and some of these things from our ELLs that are returning post-pandemic learning, and what are the trends that we're seeing, or do we have enough data yet to be able to trend outwards for some of the gaps that have appeared for those learners especially?
We don't have a full picture on it at this time, but we have noticed that there's been a lag for students that have not been able to engage. Teachers are working really hard with the diagnostics to be able to personalize learning. The LLI is like everybody's being trained on it in the system, and I'm being stopped in schools. People are so happy with the resource and what it's doing. So we look forward to, again, picking up the baton and working with those students to try to bring them up to speed.
That's wonderful. And Trustee Halberstadt has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the Newcomer Welcome Center, is that funded by us? It is not, is it? Or it is?
Yes, it is.
Really?
Yes.
Staff, how many staff do we have there?
We have 2 assessors and 1 secretary on site.
And does does the province recognize that with extra funding, or it's just part of our package?
Director Kelly.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We actually generate obviously extra funding because those students come to our board because we provide a assessment center for them. So we think it's an excellent thing. It's a wonderful welcome for them as well.
Thank you. Just a couple of acronyms. NWC reports. NWC would be what? And then also NRC staff. What do those stand for?
Sorry, it just, there's costume change there for a moment. So it used to be Newcomer Reception Center, and with the ESL review, we now named it the Newcomer Welcome Center. So it's a shift. That's what they refer to.
Does that cover the acronyms? All right. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. Do we have any more questions from trustees? Thank you very much. All right, so we'll move on to our next presentation. With us, we have Superintendent Wilcox and Samantha Mulcaster, who are here to talk about school skills building development program, the MyWay program.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us here tonight to talk about the school skills building development program. Just so everyone is aware, it is a 3-year initiative funded through the Ministry of Education. It is directed specifically towards students who have an ASD, and it's for students who have varying and complex challenges. We are funded for about $280,000 for the 3 years to maintain this program. And one of the key areas of focus is parent engagement. Samantha's going to talk a little bit about this. So I'd like to introduce Samantha Mulcaster. She's our new behavior transition specialist. She started this position just over a year ago. She took over when Tim McCarthy retired. She was a successful applicant for the position. She brings a wealth of knowledge and is instrumental in facilitating this program. And I think that it's made tremendous change and benefits to children in the program. And I think it'll be a very good news story. So, go ahead.
Thanks. Okay, I'm just going to dive right in. I am a board certified behavior analyst. So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, we usually will give the comparable of a speech language pathologist, master's degree, supervised practice exam that you have to pass, but is not a regulated health profession in Ontario at this point in time. I like to clarify that point. This is a pilot project that was, as Mike said, dictated by the Ministry of Education for 3 years, so from September of 2019 to June of 2022. And we had to focus on students with an ASD to increase some type of skill. So it could be a communication skill, a social skill, self-regulation skill, and we kind of targeted all of those skills at once. One of the stipulations of the program is that we can only implement it before and after school or during nutrition breaks. So we chose nutrition breaks, and I'll talk about what that looks like. So when we got this pilot project, we had to decide where to disperse the resources within the board, and we really quickly identified students with ASD who are presenting with those complex, challenging behaviors in the classroom for basically 2 reasons. One, that we have more workplace violence, which is a higher risk in the classroom, so we want to make sure we're addressing that for the staff and the students. And 2, because that's where we see the greatest gaps in learning. So the students who are having those high rates of challenging behavior are often not able to engage with classroom learning as effectively as other students, and we really wanted to reduce that and give them the same opportunity to engage in the learning. So we implemented something called the MyWay program. It has a very, very long clinical name that I'm not going to try to explain to everybody, but for the sake of this presentation, I used practical functional assessment and skill-based treatment, and I'll use acronyms for SPEED of PFA and SBT as we're speaking. But there is a hot link there for anybody who wants to go and look at the significant evidence base of journal articles to support the program that we pulled from the research in order to implement it. We do individualize the program for every single student. So it is a step-by-step based program. It builds skills that are essentially the most important skills for students, for all students. So the ability to tolerate frustration and persevere, the ability to communicate your wants and needs and have them met effectively in a trusting relationship with adults around you. The important part of this is that it's a zero risk process. So I'll explain what that looks like. One of the reasons it's zero risk is that it's trauma informed. So the basic way I can explain that for this particular process is that it's student led. So the student shows us what they need so we can effectively treat their challenging behavior. So safety is a priority, giving the student complete choice over their environment is a priority. They are part of the programming when we're designing the programming, and our goal is to support them to be able to communicate more effectively so we can start to build those skills and kind of decrease any defensiveness that we're seeing from those students in the classroom. So the goals, there are a lot. In short term, we want to prioritize televisability and understanding. So those are two of the really foundational features of this program. A lot of times for students with significant challenging behavior, there is a lot of back and forth of control between the students and the adults in the classroom. And the goal of this program is to say, we can't change your behavior until we understand it. So typically in more traditional behavioral applications, you would be saying, okay, a student is having challenging behavior. What is it that they're trying to get access to or get away from? This program sees that a student is always engaging in challenging behavior to get themselves back to a point of happy, relaxed, and engaged. So that can look like a lot of things, but happy, relaxed, and engaged is what we all want. All students, all adults, we all want to be happy, relaxed, and engaged. So we prioritize that at the start of the program. We assess behavior from that trauma-informed lens, so it's student-led, safety first. Our first short-term goal is to achieve zero challenging behavior, so that risk is ameliorated right from the beginning, and it stays that way for the entire program. We then look at tolerance to instructions and denials. So that's tolerance, not compliance. We're not trying to build compliance from students right off the bat. We're just trying to introduce some things like being told no, or being given an instruction that might typically be a trigger for challenging behavior, and see them be successful with that. And then the last short-term goal is to increase their success in the classroom with progressively higher expectations. So we go at their speed, small steps, so we can have like great experiences at the end. In the long term, the ability to turn off behavior, to put it to zero levels and increase that success also allows relationships to be made between the people in the classroom and that student. So with peers, with staff, with their entire school environment, threat level 0, they're really allowed to build positive relationships. I was actually at a school today where a dad came to pick up one of the students in this program and said that for the first time ever, she's so excited to go to school every day. Like she can't wait to get in the car to go to school because it's a happy, relaxed, and engaged environment. So that's awesome. We get to fade how constant we have support staff with those students because they're able to have more independence, increase their learning, and most importantly, address those gaps in learning that they have because of their challenging behavior getting in the way. So we start with that happy, relaxed, and engaged. And instead of considering a student engaging in behavior to meet one specific need, we consider that they are trying to get out of something they don't want to do to gain access to something they do want to do with engagement from the people that they like. So it's kind of a huge package. And when we're explaining that to staff teams, we try to explain that if you had earned your lunch break and I said, okay, it's time for your lunch break. Do you want your food or your cell phone? Or you can have a peer go and sit with you, but you can't have all of it. You would not be very happy, relaxed, and engaged on your lunch break. All of those things are part of that package of reinforcement. So we want to give our students that too, that whole package of what it looks like for them to be HRE, happy, relaxed, and engaged. So we make every decision through evidence and data, which I will show you as we go through the presentation. So there's an assessment to determine eligibility for the program. And what we're looking for in this assessment is that the student can be happy, relaxed, and engaged at school. That we can actively achieve that for the student because that's that foundational basis for learning. So in this process, and I'm going to just really quickly overview it because the brass tacks aren't as important, but we do interviews with all of the staff, teachers, and parents to determine what are all of those preferred things to get that student happy, relaxed, and engaged. And then we set up an open door situation right in the classroom. We have occasionally done it in a separate room in the school if needed. If that student's happy, relaxed, engaged looks like we're playing Queen, We Will Rock You on repeat really loudly, we won't do that right in the classroom, which we have done. So sometimes we'll start it out of the classroom, but it always gets back to the classroom. And the door is always open because the idea is if you are meeting that student's every need and they're happy, relaxed, and engaged, they're not going to want to leave. So the door's open, they can leave if they want to, and if they do leave, it means we've missed something in setting up the environment properly. We play, we have a really great time in that situation, and then myself or the other BCBA who we have in the board who would run this program place a really quick instruction. So, okay, let's put all this away, we can't keep playing today. And as soon as we see any indicator that that student is not happy with that, they might make a sad face, they might start to say no, they might flick their hand, we immediately say, oh, you don't want to go, you want to keep playing, let's stay here. And we go right back to that. So we do that back and forth about 5 times, just to make sure that we can kind of keep the student in a happy, relaxed, and engaged state, but also know that we know exactly what would turn behavior on as well. So there has been only one time so far where we're in this process, a student wasn't successful, and I'll tell you kind of how that actually helps us. So this is a very complicated looking graph of what this process looks like, but just so you can see the data. So that top 2 lines is when the student's engaged in that reinforcement. You can see at the bottom, there's a short dash line and then a diamond. That means that we gave an instruction and the student had that, they showed us they did not want to do it. They said no, and we went right back to reinforcement, and that kind of shows that on and off, that we have environmental control of the behavior, that we can keep the student happy, relaxed, and engaged at school, and that's what we want. We want them to be happy, we want them engaging with us, we want them not to feel like there's a threat. And then if they're successful, we move to the skill-based intervention. So there's 5 phases, which I will briefly review, because you guys don't need to know the, detailed clinical pieces. I'll show you how we use data to evaluate the success of the student. The program is typically 6 to 8 weeks. We've run the whole thing in less than 5 weeks with one really quick student. And we also had one student that took 12 weeks because of COVID-19 kind of pausing us in the middle. The program has to be written by a BCBA, so myself or our other BCBA in the board. And we hired ABA facilitators to work directly with the students during nutrition break. So they model the skills, they work directly with the student, and then the staff in the actual classroom work with the student the rest of the day running the program. So our pilot project requirement of nutrition break only is met, but the staff are also developing the capacity to run the program all day long. So this is kind of what the program looks like from a phase basis. So that foundation of happy, relaxed, and engaged, that's always where we're starting. Phase 1 is where we teach the student to say or indicate, I want it my way. And that is the whole entire phase 1 of the program. We will be happy, relaxed, and engaged and say, okay, it's time to go do some work. The student says, I want it my way. Okay, you can have it your way. We're not going to go do any work. So the days are super fun and super happy constantly, and there's a lot of positive relationship development happening. Sometimes there's 2 parts to that phase because we will teach the student to say, excuse me, I want it my way, please, or to go tap someone on the shoulder to gain their attention so that we have some appropriate skill building. Phase 2 is introducing the word no. So we start saying no, but we don't follow through on it. The no is just there to kind of desensitize them. We teach them to say something like, that's cool, and then we say, wow, you took that so well, you can have it your way. So they're hearing that word no, and it's a positive thing and not a negative thing, so we don't have this explosive behavior. And when we're doing that, and this is the key to the program, we're still giving it to them their way immediately 60% of the time. So the program continues to progress based on the idea that the MyWay and having all of your happy, relaxed, and engaged given to you immediately is like the jackpot on the slot machine. And as we progress, you're always sometimes going to have that response from the people around you. So it builds this trust and compliance and the motivation that the kids keep using that skill, because sometimes they won't have to do anything and it's going to be their way. And sometimes they have to do a few things, but their needs will be met by the end irrespective. Phase 3, we give simple requests. So we're going to say no. They say that's cool or okay, or we've done a couple different things, and we'll give them something really easy like, oh, can you just shut the door? Okay, now you can have it your way. So really simple instructions. Then we move to phase 4. So more complex instructions, those would be classroom work. So it might be a worksheet or an activity that the teachers and support staff are looking for IEP goals. And we're still giving MyWay right away 30% of the time on a variable schedule so the student doesn't kind of know when to expect that. And phase 5 is everlasting, where we're giving multiple instructions in a row. So it might be, First you have to go to circle, then you have to go work with your teacher. We're going to go out for recess. Now you can have it your way. And they've participated in, 2 hours of the school day without problematic behavior. And that leads to all of these other skills that can be met because now the student has trust in the school system, in their adults, in their peers, and the fact that their needs will be met consistently, always, all the time. So we've had incredible success with it. We use data to make every decision. So these graphs look complicated and the words on the bottom don't have to mean anything to you, but just to show you guys that it's not just, oh, we think the student's ready for the next phase. When we see them being 80% of the time independent in saying, I want it my way, or accepting no, or following through with instruction, over 2 days, then we move to the next phase. So this graph shows you every time you see a new color, we've introduced the next phase. And I picked this student's graph in particular because you can see where the green line starts in the first graph. That's when we started to introduce those complex demands. So novel IEP goals, things he could not ever do before. And COVID happened, so we had to stop. And we actually brought the parents in and taught the parents how to run the program to prepare them for the March break, which they then carried forward through the entire time. And he came back to school, which is the second graph, and the skills were still there. So he's closed now. We're not with him anymore because he's doing so well. But you can see how his green line continues, as do all of the others, pretty successfully across the board. And that dark blue line across the bottom the whole way through is how frequently you're seeing challenging behavior. So 0 to near 0 levels. And these are for students that maybe could not make it through the day before. And then we also compare to baseline levels of challenging behavior. So this student was hurting themselves sometimes 100 times per hour. And once we started treatment, it went down to near 0 levels and stayed there. And we end the treatment by telling the caregivers and the teaching staff to say yes when you can and no when you can't. Because the idea is that by that end time, students are able to progress to a point where it's a natural setting of reinforcement. A lot of us can have it our way sometimes, and not all the time. And sometimes people tell us no, and then they kind of let it go. Sometimes the requests are big, sometimes they're small. It's a much more natural schedule of reinforcement for most people. So this is kind of how we leave things, and we do a follow-up at the 8-week and 12-week mark to make sure things are continuing to do well. We also bring in the parents. So the way we've done that is we have a meeting with the parents where they review videos of their child at all the different phases with the school team, and then they observe in the classroom. And then I sit down with them and pretend to be the student, and they give me instructions, and we practice to make sure they feel confident that they know how to do it. And then we actually bring them directly into the classroom to step in behind staff. We had one student who would say MyWay in order to have staff hold his hands. He just really needed to have his hands held. And we actually had parents like slide in behind him. So when he did it, parents were the ones who turned around, and he was so happy to see his parents there. Everyone was crying. It was great. And then we move it into the home environment, and we help them continue it at home as well. So it's the skills are transferring across environments in a really beautiful way. And usually the students are already at phase 5 at this point. So parents don't have to start at the beginning. They can right away start giving instructions, and the kids pick it up really quickly. And we provided the COVID-19 support, and we are providing virtual learning support to 2 students who are in the program. So we've done this program with 6 students since January. We did 1 unofficially before we hired the EBA facilitator, so I didn't include his data. We have 3 additional students currently in phase 1, and actually between last week and this week, we started 2 more students. I started a student today, so I didn't include those new students either. But from those initial 6, the cumulative workplace violence reports coming in, where the staff were actually made contact in workplace violence, were 104, and that was just for last year. Afterwards, we've only had 6 for those 6 students in total. So a really significant decrease in violent incident reports, and that was a huge thing for us to see in terms of safety of students and of staff. 3 of the students in the program had previously been on modified days, so they were at school for 1, 2, or 3 hours a day. All of them are in full day attendance now since the project and are able to maintain at school. one student who was in a Riften chair throughout the day because of periods of behavior that required him to be unsafe. We were able to consult with his occupational therapist and actually remove that support for different parts of the day so he's able to operate freely in the classroom without problematic behavior. And then one student who was unsuccessful with that assessment, it was actually really helpful because a lot of time when we're seeing students who have significant challenging behavior, we're looking at our community resources. We really want their support. And this allows us to say, hey, we really actually can't meet this student's needs at school. We cannot get them happy, relaxed, and engaged at school. They need something we can't give. So it allowed us to make a really appropriate referral to community resources where we've truly exhausted every option, where we can't have success in school for whatever reason. And that it's nice to almost be able to ensure that we've given every possible option. And then we also have done it with many other students. So we do have 2 students who don't have ASD we've run this program with now outside of the pilot project because we've seen such wonderful results. We've done it with one student who had a significant trauma history. So for that student, happy, relaxed, engaged looked like no one behind him and no one could approach from certain areas. We had to arrange the environment very specifically to maintain happy, relaxed, and engaged. We've had a range of IQ levels. We've had verbal students, nonverbal students, students of, I think we've gone not to the secondary sector yet, but all the way up to grade 7. So JK to grade 7, and students in a spec ed classroom as well as not in a spec ed classroom. So we would like to find ways to make whole classroom-based approaches with this, and we're doing that a bit. We've had 2 teachers who had this program for a student ask us, is there ways we can implement elements of this to our entire class to reduce classroom behavior across the board and help build those positive relationships? So we've done that a little bit. We're going to see what the success level of that is. We currently have 72 students on caseload. We also have, a mild wait list, but we know that there is a number of students, even those who most don't have autism, who would be a really good candidate for this program, where it would give us the best rates of success for a lot of those students in a really safe and risk-free way. Various profiles and diagnoses, and we have behaviors on our caseload list that range from verbal noncompliance to violence to aggression to severe self-injury, and even students who are just, oppositional when work demands are placed could benefit from a program like this. There is some research to support doing it with students who have no special education connections, no diagnoses of sorts, but are just struggling with either trauma or opposition. Probably not enough research that we would go in that direction yet, but it's coming and that's really helpful. And then we're currently prioritizing the program for the most at-risk students. So those students who are on the modified day, who are really struggling to connect with their learning. Thanks. Questions?
Thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. Do we have any questions from trustees?
I have a question, Burgess.
Go ahead, Trustee Burgess.
What a great presentation. My question is, it looks very successful. I'm thrilled about particularly the safety for our staff and safety for parents. You did mention something about, over the summer while COVID was in place, empowering and training and helping build capacity within families and parents taking over, et cetera. I'm wondering if you gleaned any specific things about that. And my real question is, beyond the pilot, how do we sustain this program? Do we need to advocate for funding? What do you think will happen once the pilot is finished?
So at this point, we actually this year hired 2 additional ABA facilitators outside of the pilot funding so that we could continue to run the program with students who are appropriate and continue to see them gain success. So we are running it outside of the pilot project now, and we do have some additional staff in order to do that at a greater rate. There's still just myself and one other BCBA, so we're slightly limited, but in general, we're able to do it much more now that we have additional staff. And I think that as we see the success of this, the hope is that they'll extend the pilot as a whole or make it a more permanent program that we can run more frequently. But I don't think that there is any plan for us to not continue with this approach to the students that we're working with, because it's really an approach that we've been doing under the guise of the pilot project. But we can continue the approach even if we don't necessarily have those guidelines in place.
Do you have any follow-up, Trustee Burgess?
Well, specifically, I'm wondering how it impacts our special education funding.
So the two positions, the ABA facilitators, we used the student support money to hire those positions for this time, so that it is a very sustainable program in the sense that the funding for the program is actually about $280,000 for 3 years. And what we are building, I think, is important because Samantha touched on the fact that we're building staff capacity all the time. So even if the funding for this ends, I certainly can see where if we have a plan in place, we can certainly build sustainability that will continue. Does that answer your question?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from trustees? I have one. There was on one of your slides you mentioned that classroom teachers are asking for some of these skills to be able to implement in their classrooms. I'm wondering if you can talk a little more about some of those circumstances, maybe some of those examples on what they're doing, and kind of building on Trustee Burgess's question about building capacity, and then allowing students outside of the pilot and students outside of the ASD spectrum to benefit from this as well.
Yeah, so we've done it a couple different ways in terms of teachers who are requesting that support. Without consent, obviously we wouldn't make any student-specific recommendations, so we make them on a whole classroom basis. So some of the inherent elements of the program that we can pull into a whole classroom program are really helpful. So things like the idea and general concept of happy, relaxed, and engaged being multiple things at once and not a choice of you can have this or this or this. So building in some reinforcement systems that are whole classroom based, where students are can do some of their work to access a package of reinforcement instead of individual reinforcers that are more staff controlled, and looking and saying, what is that need? So we've worked a lot with some of those classrooms to say at the beginning of every day, just play for a bit and see what these students want and need. What are the things that they're including in their package of reinforcers, and how can you get them happy, relaxed, and engaged? And if they're not happy, relaxed, and engaged, consider whether this is a good time to place a demand that is typically not something that they're going to have success with. And then we've also considered the idea of that variable schedule. So I talked about that slot machine idea. So when it's time to say, check your schedule to go to the next activity, and a student is coming up to their schedule saying, oh my gosh, you cleaned up and came and checked your schedule so well, you can go back and play for 5 more minutes. So just to recognize that they've done something really well, and intermittently just not even maintain the expectation so that they continue to be motivated. So we call them surprise shorties, but it's like, surprise, we're not actually going to make you follow through. We're so happy. And that's what we call them for the entire program. But in this context, we're setting it up so that the whole classroom gets that. So I was in one of those classrooms the other day, yesterday, and a student who typically has trouble leaving gym class came into the line, and the whole entire class stopped and had like a 30-second dance party for this student coming into the line without problematic behavior, which is really exciting. They won't do it every time, but occasionally he gets to be really special and have this super fun time. And then the teacher said, wow, this all went so well. You guys can all go back and play for a few more minutes. And then they all came back really nicely again, and they walked to class and went to do their work. So it's just trying to build in that, instead of trying to kind of be more dictative in the way that we're running a classroom, looking at how can we make it a really joyful experience, because that happy, relaxed, and engaged is like rocket fuel for learning. No one learns when they're not in that state. That's how we kind of build. So trying to build that capacity is already having an impact.
It's fascinating. I'm glad that you mentioned that about the learning environment, because I mean, when you're talking about it, and I'm hearing, okay, the student did something, and then we say, oh, okay, it's fine to go and do that. It's counter to what we think of a classroom experience should look like, or classroom management should look like. And then to see the success rate, not only in the classroom, but then further to home, and how much that changes not only the student's home environment, but how they return back to school and how they are around their peers. I think it's fascinating. Any other questions? Oh, Trustee Halberstadt, always following me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a congratulations. I was it's amazing the results you're getting, like going from 104 with workplace violence to 6. Is this a new science, the happy, relaxed, and engaged? And if it is, are we leading the way on it? Or I guess there's other pilot schools too, or pilot boards, but
So
this is a new science, is it not?
it is. So traditional like behavior modification techniques are that people kind of associate with students with challenging behavior are usually not so open-minded and don't usually start with that foundational happy, relaxed, and engaged. Current applied behavior analysis is very much focused on that. So the science of behavior has moved in that direction of starting with meeting the student's needs and creating goals that are within what the student can do at this very moment and not pushing past that point until you've built a trusting relationship. And some of the old science that would maybe not be helpful for continuing to have that relationship is no longer considered best practice. Within this particular model, it's been around for just over 6 years now. There started to be enough research for it to be kind of a wider thing. And it was introduced by a man named Dr. Hanley, and he's very, very wonderful. It is not something that's happening in schools everywhere. It is traditionally a clinical program that's introduced in a clinical setting because there are those students where they're happy, relaxed, and engaged is something that we can't safely do at school. And in a clinic, you could. Doing it in the school environment has challenges, but there's enough research for us to go through and figure out the best ways to do it in the school environment. The pilot project is so broad that every school is doing it differently. We are certainly doing the most clinical application, and we, I think, are the only pilot project that was presented at the last meeting I went to that was focusing on this particular group of students. So a lot of the other school boards are doing things like groups where over nutrition break, a bunch of students who maybe are in a mainstream classroom with ASD come together and work on social skills, which is excellent, wonderful. We just really wanted to prioritize this need because it was such a great need for us, and it's been working out really, really well. It is a program we were implementing occasionally with individual students as they came on our caseload if we felt that we didn't have much else to offer. And we were really successful with it prior to starting it as the pilot project, but this just allowed us to have the foundation to really grow the program and do it in a really nice way with additional support.
Thank you again. Great job.
Any other questions from trustees? Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Mike. We appreciate that presentation. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Okay, moving forward through our agenda, we're into delegations. We have none. We have no one on the speakers list. We have no new business and no reports to be received. So we are on to trustee question period. Do any trustees have a question? Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two, so if I could go with one. Okay. So, we've heard a lot of the numbers about how many students are in our classrooms, how many are doing the virtual school and all of that. But what I wanted to know was, do we have a handle on an average class size in our elementary schools? And we haven't heard any of that information, and if it could be broken down into, primary, intermediate, whatever. Do we have any of that information?
Yeah, I think Superintendent Mills can answer that. I do believe that the class size average dropped with this new, I could be wrong with the new change, but I think we did give it before, and the class averages were fairly low, but I will look to Superintendent Mills, who's on this every day.
So yes, our class size average in the JI is where we had most of our concern. Obviously, those are a little bit bigger classes compared to the primary sizes. Those remain pretty much the same. So they dropped just slightly. Our junior intermediate class size right now, our average junior intermediate class size is 23.72. I'm sorry. I guess I should have thrown my glasses on before I did this. Excuse me, 23.2. So it's a little bit slightly lower than what I just mentioned there. So 23.2. Average primary class size is 19.68. And our average FDK class size is 21.97.
Do a follow-up, Trustee Hatfield? No. Do we have any other trustees for a first question? I have a first question, but Trustee Hatfield, go ahead with your second question.
Okay. My second question comes from the letter that trustees got, or the email that trustees got from Aaron Roy, president of our local OSSTF. I have to say that I agree with the concern about allowing students to take courses over, especially from the period of March to June 2020, and to remove the 34 credit cap. You know, I was a trustee in the days when they could go for 5 years, and of course that was removed. But under the unusual circumstances of the pandemic, I know that we have heard from students and parents about their concerns on grades, especially the grade 11 and 12 students who are hoping for scholarships and such. And so the email to trustees was asking for our support in advocating for this to our provincial government. And so I'm putting it out to trustees to see if they would agree by consensus to take a position on this and advocate to allow students that opportunity to retake courses if they find that it's necessary for them, for themselves.
So are we looking through that by consensus? Do you have a comment on that, Trustee Halberstadt?
Yeah, well, I'd just like to maybe hear from administration on how they feel about this, and I guess the academic integrity, is that part of this motion? So maybe to the director.
Thank you for the question, Trustee Halberstadt, through you, Madam Chair. The 34 credit, just to explain what that means, that credits that are accumulated after that are funded at a lower rate, and so there's been somewhat of a discouragement for students to continue. So certainly I don't have any issue with that kind of a letter going to the ministry. It is a different circumstance. We're in a pandemic. The learning environment is different. I believe we're doing good work. I believe that teachers are teaching the very best they can, but certainly for students to have more opportunity to feel prepared, I see no issue with it. And if it does affect funding, and so if that funding change could occur, I think it would assist school boards.
Thank you very much.
Question, reconsent, Burgess?
Yep, go ahead, Trustee Burgess.
My understanding is we're asking for consent for the letter. I absolutely consent to that, but for clarification purposes, and I think Director Kelly hit it, students can continue to take additional courses, but the funding for that is given at the adult education level of funding, which is significantly lower and therefore causes concern for our budget, for staffing, etc. So it's not that students can't take 5 years; they can, but guidance and we will, staff will discourage that because it sabotages the budget. And that's the tension. That's the tension. It's not that they can't do it. It's just that it's expensive to do it. So our advocacy should be for, I think, what was not really stated clearly in the letter, maybe from Mrs. Roy, but our advocacy is to allow it to really suggest strongly that the funding to support this is essential for our students. They should not be penalized in a time when things aren't the normal thing, So I fully support the advocacy, but the advocacy really is for the funding to support them in past 34 for upgrading purposes. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Trustee Leclerc.
I just want to say that I do support the on consent. I will say that I have had numerous emails from parents of students that are in grade 12 who have been told by their principal that we do not support and we do not permit students to go for that extra year. So we may be funded at that lower rate, but it's not encouraged. It's in fact discouraged. So I would support the consent letter.
Do I have any other comments from trustees on this? I think we can go by consensus on this. Do I have? Yeah, Trustee Halberstadt.
Just as a point of information, the funding issue is referred to in the letter, and I mean, that's an important part of it, but I think it's also important to allow the students to have that choice with the cap removed if they want to take the additional courses. So I think it's both.
So what I'm hearing here is that we're looking for consensus on a letter that would cover not only full funding for anything over the 34 credits, but also that there would be it would be encouraged as a choice for students to be able to do, and certainly a letter from the ministry to that regard would help in those school-based decisions that are happening there. Do I have consensus around the room to send that letter?
I have clarification needing.
Go ahead, Trustee Burgess.
I want to make sure I'm making myself clear because I hear two different things. I believe the request was for advocacy because I think it's a provincial issue and I think it's a funding issue. And I also heard, and I concur completely, there's a real disappointment, and it's problematic for a lot of students from last year going into this year about the level of learning for particularly graduating students, etc. So what I hear is the advocacy for a letter going for the province, but I don't hear clarification that we're going to be changing our guidance. And that's the disconnect. So I completely support the letter for funding, but in the absence of the funding, it's a question to administration. If trustees unanimously consent to this letter for advocacy, in the meantime, will we be also supporting it in practice with our administration, with our guidance, etc., by saying it's okay, senior students, we will support you in this, knowing that we're going to take a hit on our budget. So I definitely consent to the letter, but I'd like to know what the ramifications are within our board.
Director Kelly?
Yeah, it hasn't really been a discussion point with the senior administration, something that I could take back. It is a significant funding difference. It's actually 1/3, I believe, of the regular funding, but that is a discussion point, and certainly something I think that really the ministry should be providing direction on as well.
Thank you very much. So looks like I've got nods around the room that I sent a letter, and I thank Ms. Roy for her advocacy in this as well. And I thank trustees for. Trustee Halberstadt, do you have something to add?
Well, yeah, I'd like to clear it up. Is this just a letter to the ministry, which I'm all for, but or is it also that we're going to pick up the tab? That seems to be what Trustee Burgess was talking about.
Director Kelly can clarify that, but I think what we are doing here, what we are agreeing to here, is the consent letter. It is a administrative decision on what happens at the school level. We can do our advocacy toward the ministry, which we are doing with this letter, both in funding and in principle of encouraging students to do that. But that decision is made at the administrative level. What I've heard Director Kelly say is that this advocacy that we're doing would make that a smoother process for them. Okay, so it looks like we got consent for the letter. Thank you very much to trustees for that. The question that I had if I see no other questions from trustees, is around the use of Teams. I know we're using Teams for our virtual school, for most of our virtual school, and I'm wondering what some of the measures and policies that we have in place surrounding student-to-student contact within Teams, and some of the searches that they can do in the GIF or GIF, whichever is your flavor, on some of the functionality of Teams that is kind of open for them to be able to communicate with each other. And I'm kind of looking around to kind of tailor that question a little bit around some things that may end up at our anti-bullying committee for that student-to-student engagement that's happening virtually on Teams.
I think this was an issue that was brought forward by some of our teachers. I know it has turned into a classroom management issue as much as a policy or restriction of what is on Teams. I know we want to keep that chat available for the appropriate uses for our classrooms. Obviously, we want to if there are things that are in Teams that are detrimental to our students and are things that can be used for hurtful ways, certainly we would take a look at those. If you have specific examples for us, we'd be all ears to hear those. But certainly we want to keep that open as a good way to communicate for students.
Thank you. So I think what I'm hearing from that is that parents should be communicating with their classroom teacher if they see any incidences where that's happening.
Absolutely. Always good to keep open lines of communication.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so seeing no more, do we have any notices of motion do you have a question for trustee question period? Go ahead, trustee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate, I know the teachers for the virtual school, they teach very hard from the morning to the afternoon, and I really appreciate. But I heard from several parents, they do worry about their children's eyesight. So they want me to send their opinion that they may, kind of have more relaxed time. I know it's difficult to balance, but I wonder if you can have a way to do the survey on the virtual school so that both the teacher and the kids can be more effective and not very under a lot of pressure, and to make it both for their health and for their education. Am I clear?
Director Kelly?
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Chin. The question really is about the instructional time for students. So students do have to be online a particular amount of time. I think it is, I agree with you, it is a lot of screen time, and that's something that we look at, but we do have to follow the ministry guidelines with respect to instructional time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So moving forward, do we have any notices of motion for in here? Nothing for in here. Do we have any announcements from trustees? Trustee Halberstadt.
Yeah, I'd just like to mention again, I think her name was mentioned previously, but Deanna McLennan from LaSalle Public School was named a Prime Minister's Award winner. I noticed there's a big article in the paper today about her the other day, and what a tremendous individual she is. So I just wanted to kudos to her.
Absolutely. Congratulations to her. It's well deserved. Absolutely. It's just a testament to all the achievement that we have in our board, from students all the way up through staff and administration. Any more announcements from trustees? You guys know I have some. I always have some. So it is Treaty Recognition Week this week, and I actually had a nice conversation with Tina DeCastro this week, asking her what's going on in our schools as far as talking about Treaty Recognition Week. And students have been really involved from the virtual school and our face-to-face schools with getting live Q&As with Indigenous creatives and leaders, getting to ask them questions to explore themes and traditions of Indigenous culture. That's really rooted in the curriculum and really by grade level. And for educators, there is Tina's created a Microsoft Sway, which she walked me through today, which was very cool. And she's put together a resource list that's constantly growing with ways that if maybe in your class time you don't have time to participate in a Q&A or an inquiry-based activity for Treaty Recognition Week, there is a bunch of age-appropriate and grade-specific resources that students can use in that growing list. So definitely something for people to pick up on. And thank you to Tina and her team for what they do in that work. It is also, we are on the cusp of of reentry for students and changes in learning models. So November 9th, we'll have students entering whether they switch learning models from one to the other in elementary, and November 12th for secondary school, which is the start of the new quadmester for them. So I'm mentioning this to ask us all to have some patience. Now, there may be some bumps in the road as we kind of move along. There may be some issues that arise and some things that in these unprecedented times just happen to us. I'm just asking us all to have a little patience with each other, with ourselves, and try to ease the road back in for people who have chosen a new path for themselves, and allow them to have some grace in dealing with some of those changes as we move along. So with that, I will adjourn into operations and finance.
I guess we're not moving. So I will call this meeting to order, and the attendance, I think, is the same as the last.
We haven't switched yet.
If I could interrupt, sorry. I know that Ms. Malash is not here yet for taking the minutes, is she? Okay. She's here.
Sorry, if we could just get a few minutes and then.
Sure. Sorry, Rush. Ron wants to go watch the election.
So just for anybody watching, we're switching now to operations and finance, which actually requires us to do some personnel switching in here, and of course all of that personnel switching comes with disinfectant as well now. So so it's going to take just a few minutes for anybody who's patiently watching us tonight, rather than election returns. That's just what's happening, and then we'll convene into operations and finance.
Okay. Ready, set, go. Call to order. Attendance. Everyone's here with the exception of Trustee Olmsted, who has sent her regrets. Trustee Burgess is on the phone. The student trustees are here. Approval of the agenda. Okay, Ron and Gail. I would like to ask, I would add one more item onto the agenda, and that is the discussion on the resilience infrastructure stream that the government is giving to school boards. I had a conversation with Superintendent Armstrong early today about what that is. So I think for people who don't know, I'd like to maybe get information on that. And also with that same item, Trustee Burgess asked that it be brought forward for some questions. So I'd like to add that, if it's okay with everybody, to the agenda.
Mr. Chair, at what point in the agenda, what are you adding?
What's that?
Where in the agenda are you adding?
Oh, I'll add it at the bottom after we've gone through the regular. What's that? Yeah, under new business we can put it. Why, do you don't want to hear about Gail, or? Well, if it's okay, we'll add it. Thank you. Approve the agenda as amended. Ron and Gail. Not Gail? Okay. All in favor? Thank you. Declaration of conflict of interest. Don't think there is one. Approval of the minutes, October the 6th, Operations and Finance Committee meeting. Alicia and Ron. All in favor? Opposed, carries.
Support.
Business arising from the minutes. Anything?
I have a question, Burgess.
Trustee Burgess?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's going to be in any presentation, but I don't know. Now that the cold weather has arrived, I'm wondering if the heat is on, and we've made references to thermal comfort for students, etc. And I'm wondering, do we have a new protocol where we're adding more fresh air to the buildings than we normally would during, when the heat is on? In other words, do we still have some open windows, etc.? And are we using them with portable air filtration, etc.? So an update on the ventilation. It's referred to, but...
This is Superintendent Armstrong. In terms of the heating in the schools, I would need to clarify that with facility services. However, the temperature right now is kind of in flux. It's in that awkward stage where we're also going to be getting warmer this weekend, or this week. So I don't know that there's been any adjustments to the heating itself in the schools, but we continue to monitor and respond to any questions or comments that we have from staff or students with respect to their comfort in the school. But facility services is monitoring that. With respect to ventilation, we continue to have 100% ventilation of outdoor air into our facilities. So that continues, and that has been going on since the beginning of when school started. And then with respect to air purification, we have procured through the Optimizing Air Quality in School funding up to 300 air purifying air purifying units, and they've been placed in classrooms where we don't have forced air ventilation, and so that process is ongoing right now.
So supplemental, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So my question is, you're right, it is that awkward time where, do I put the furnace on or don't I? So my question might be for the upcoming weeks, and we won't be having a committee meeting, I suppose, until January now. So the questions might come at a regular board meeting, I'm not sure, but I'm wondering if we have a plan as far as letting parents and guardians know, etc., that we do have, it has been suggested that there is additional outside air intake, like an open window, if we can do it, so that thermal comfort that you referred to, throughout the summer and through, the beginning of the school year, etc., that tension between having an open window and fresh ventilation and having, being warm enough. Do we have a plan in place where we're actually asking our students and their parents and guardians to have layered clothing throughout this entire winter? fall and winter, because there may be a level of some thermal discomfort, you know? Do we have that ready to go?
Not specifically, but it's certainly something that we would consider, that we can certainly share with our principals. I know specific to questions that I have in this building itself, I do respond in that manner, but I would be happy to make sure that that's communicated.
Okay, thank you. It's a good idea. Presentations? Question?
I had some questions from the minutes. There was extensive discussion and trustee questions on the presentation that we had on COVID-19 expenses. And so I have a couple of follow-up questions on that. Page 3 of the minutes, it was suggested that a letter be sent to the ministry requesting additional funding for COVID expenses. I just wasn't sure if that letter went out.
Anybody?
That would go to you, I guess, as chair of the committee.
I didn't write a letter.
I can check. It would have usually come from either the finance department or the director's office, but I'm not recalling that. Did it go to you, to the chair? So that, yeah, I will follow up on that. Thank you.
And we also had approved and talked about hiring a communications officer. I noticed there was an ad in the paper a while back, and I wondered where we are in that process.
Thank you for that. The applications have just come in, and we're beginning to look at them.
And one more question from there? Okay. There was also some question and talk about mental health supports related to COVID-19 and the costs that might be incurred. And most of the discussion surrounded mental health support for students. And I wanted to know if there was anything we were doing with regard to support for staff in this regard. I know back in August I made a comment about concern for mental health of staff, and I was kind of rebuked on that at the time, not by administration. So I wanted to know if there is anything at all directed towards mental health support for staff.
Superintendent Houston, I think, has a response to that.
So we do have our JEEP program that is very active. I just had a meeting with them today. They're quite busy in terms of supporting staff around mental health. Oftentimes they'll provide initial counseling, and then they'll send for referrals to people. And then some of our non-unionized members have access to LifeWorks, which is a different employee assistance program. So all very busy, but there are supports available for people, and we continue to remind them. JEEP has their committee meeting tomorrow with a representative from every bargaining unit to remind them to continue to reach out when people are in need of support.
Is that being taken into consideration when we're looking at COVID-19 expenses? The support that's necessary, not just for students, but for staff as well?
So I would think that if they keep up at the rate they're going, we may need to look at potentially some additional support or at other opportunities that may be available to our employees. They're extremely busy. They're getting on average 2 to 3 new people per day, which is not what's happened in the past.
Right, yeah. Thank you very much for that.
Anything further on business arising? No? Presentations? None. Delegations? None. Speakers list? None. New business? None. Pardon?
Put it on there?
Oh, that's my item, yeah. New business. Yeah, maybe Superintendent Armstrong can talk about that extra money that might be coming our way before the end of the month.
Thank you. On October the 28th, the ministry announced some funding referred to as resiliency infrastructure funding. And this is a program that's been introduced under Investing in Canada's infrastructure program. And what it does is it will provide $700 million in combined federal provincial funding for education-related infrastructure projects. It is application-based. Submissions are due to the Ministry of Education on November the 18th. What this program or this funding is intended to do is to support retrofits, repairs, and upgrades to school board facilities to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic by supporting health and safety. Eligible facilities include elementary and secondary schools, continuing education facilities, and childcare is co-located in school board facilities. The projects have to fall under certain themes. These include promoting occupant health and safety, improving facility condition, so for example, optimizing air quality, water filling restations, etc., enhancing physical distancing, and facilitating distance learning. And in this case, it would be specific to fixed IT assets, such as network and broadband infrastructure. So we are currently in the process of evaluating potential projects, and we will definitely, as a board, be making submissions to the Ministry of Education on November 18th. The ministry was very clear that it needed to have a very specific link to COVID-19. So it's not intended to just repair and replace what you already have. You need to make that health and safety link. The other caveat with this funding is that it must be spent by December 31st, 2021. If the project is not substantially complete, any costs that you've incurred throughout that process will be considered unfunded, and the boards will be responsible for bearing those costs. So it's a lot, because you can imagine what's going to be going out into the market with boards tendering projects once the funding's approved. And obviously the timeline is really tight. And it's hopeful that we'll have a response in terms of our success with any of our submissions for the end of January.
Okay, just supplementary. So we don't know yet how much of our allotment is going to be?
No, it could be zero. It could be 700 million. It could be $1 million. It's all, I hope it's 700 million. But it's all dependent on the projects that we're submitting. We need to rank those projects, and we'd be really competing effectively with all the other school boards in the province for that money.
There's no lack of projects that we're going to submit.
We have oodles of projects we're going to submit.
Anything further on that? Yes, Trustee Higginson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So those are some aggressive timelines, let's call them, both for between the announcement and the deadline to submit. It's less than a month. And then spending by just over a year from probably the time that they will announce those. It's quite aggressive. So to your point, maybe flippantly about getting $700 million, that would be wonderful. But do we have targeted already in mind things that we know that we can get done by December 2021, irrespective of knowing anything about the trades and anything that we may encounter that's unpredictable in that way?
Thank you for the question. I think some of the items that we would likely be considering is in those schools where we don't have forced air ventilation and we've purchased and procured the air purifying units, we would be wanting to install mechanical systems to upgrade so that there is forced air ventilation in those spaces. So there is a small grouping of schools that we would be focusing that on. Some other items that we would be considering, obviously, are some easier things in terms of adding bottle refilling stations so that they're more prevalent in our schools. We are able to adjust or apply for funding for air conditioning. So we would be looking at trying to add some cooling centers in some of the schools, for example, libraries or in computer rooms. Another item we're taking a look at is reducing touch points. So for example, our fire doors, we like to prop them open so that people aren't touching them all the time during this environment. But we want to be able to have them close automatically if a fire alarm gets triggered. So we would be looking for upgrading related to that, as well as touchless faucets. So when you go to wash your hands, you're not touching the knobs. And in terms of our early on, we would also potentially be looking at adding separate washrooms, because some of those early ons do not have access to their own washrooms, or creating separate entrances for those facilities so that they're not going through the schools. So those are some of the facility related projects. And I know from an IT perspective as well, we are looking at, trying to add network infrastructure to support more wireless opportunities in our schools. So those are some of the items we're considering. But again, this has only been announced on Thursday. So we still have some work to do with this.
Thank you.
No? Okay. Pardon? Trustee Chin, sorry.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, I wonder if we can add an item like the tent outside, that during the snowing day, that the kids can play outside, like the tent, the big tent, and they can play outside. Oh. And also, I see some high schools in their main gate, there is no doorbell. So sometimes if you close the door, and I don't know if the parents can contact inside. So I wonder if we can add that.
I think there's a lot of projects potentially that we could make requests for. The timelines are tight, so I think the best approach that we're going to take is to gather all the data and to evaluate where we think the most bang for our buck is going to come from, and where we might have the most success in trying to get funding. Things like putting up a tent so that they can play outside. I think the ministry is looking more for something that's a little bit more permanent in terms of some of the changes that we would be making, rather than putting up a tent. Certainly things like adding to your outdoor classroom space is something that the ministry has indicated would be something that could be considered because it promotes physical distancing. But I think, again, it would need to be something more of a permanent nature than something temporary that would provide better benefit of the funding spent.
Okay, thank you.
Gail?
Thank you. So the way I'm seeing this is like a good news, bad news announcement. Good news that they want to put some funding into it. Bad news that they're only giving you a couple weeks to put together some very detailed proposals to even be considered for any of the funding. And I have to think that that's part of the game plan, is that we don't have a lot of time, and we can't ask for a complete wish list of things that would really be a benefit to our buildings during the pandemic, that would really improve the learning environment for our students. I know that our staff will burn the midnight oil. I know that they'll do the 24/7 to get this done in the next couple of weeks. So I want to thank you for that. And I think that the things that you've mentioned that are on your mind to try and put together are all worthwhile projects. And thank you very much to the staff that's going to be working diligently, I know, for the next couple of weeks to try and get this in. And hopefully we'll have some success with some of our projects. So thank you to the staff ahead of time, because I know that you're going to be busy.
Okay, and I think Trustee Burgess had some things to say about the about this item, and I guess there's a meeting on Saturday, OPSPA meeting, regional meeting, and there's 3 questions that we could answer either collectively or individually. So maybe Trustee Burgess can give us some ideas.
Well, Mr. Chair, actually, I was just going to ask under trustee question period.
Okay, we'll move on then. Reports. Trustee expenditure reports. Any comments? We came in well under budget, So, report to be received. And then the second one is an easy one, accounts receivable written off for the year ended August 31st. There's none applied, so I guess it's a report to be received. Trustee question period.
Mr. Chair?
Sorry, go ahead, Julia.
Thank you. Trustees across the province are going to be meeting this Saturday in OPSPA, the Ontario Public School Boards Association regional meeting. The Western regional meeting will be held virtually again. Normally we physically meet, but this will be another virtual meeting. And we are going to be looking at, as we do in a cyclical way, the grants for student needs, which is, of course, the provincial funding that we consult with the provincial government on in a cyclical way. And we're going to be looking at specifically what Western region needs and whether or not last year's submission needs adjustment to our prioritized needs. Last year we looked at special education, grant, children and youth mental health, Indigenous education, skilled trades and apprenticeships, modern learning for today and tomorrow, student transportation, capital and facility funding, professional learning. We had a lot of things that, a lot of asks. But the questions that were submitted to us to consider and that we would like to have some indication from trustees and administration for, and I'm going to ask the questions here, but I don't expect answers this evening. But because we need to put some input on Saturday, if we could get some responses, I would appreciate it, Mr. Chair. So the three questions are, do you support the continued inclusion of all the identified areas of funding that were part of last year's submission? And those are the ones I just mentioned. The second question is, in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, are there other areas that your board wants highlighted and areas where additional funding is needed? And that specifically might be something that we can speak to since we just talked about the likelihood of getting our needs met even through this announcement of application for additional funding. And the third question is, are there areas under the priorities and partnership funding, that's the PPF, that should be transferred into the grants for student needs? In other words, to be edified in the annual grants for student needs rather than on an ad hoc kind of basis through the PPF. Is there anything missing that should be added to the priorities and partnerships funding? So if administration and trustees could look at that and get back to any of the OPSPA reps, and that would be Trustee Sipcart, Trustee Higgison, and myself, I would appreciate that. And if anybody can answer any of these things now, I'd appreciate that as well. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Anybody now could make some remarks, or should just individually, as the week goes on, and there's not too much of a week left, but get it to the trustees. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Other questions? No, I just have one, and I was reading online about the Toronto District School Board having absenteeism costs that is going to cost them $42 million. Now, I know that's a huge board, but I did ask Superintendent Armstrong if we might get hit somewhat on that based on absenteeism. Maybe, sorry, Superintendent Houston.
I can't respond specifically to what the costs will be. I leave that up to my colleagues in the finance department. But I can tell you that we are experiencing very increased absenteeism on a daily basis.
Okay, which we have to pick up at the end of the day, right? Those
Yes,
costs.
the costs, yes.
Okay, could we get a figure at some point in time from finance?
We are working on the revised estimates, which is the updated budget that's being submitted to the ministry next month. And so we will build some projections in and some sensitivity analysis around absenteeism.
Thank you. Any further questions? Notices of motion? Announcements? Adjournment? Over to Trustee Leclerc, Chairperson Leclerc.
Thank you. We're on to item E from the public meeting session, which is declaration of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? Seeing none, actions of the board meeting private session. I'll turn over to the vice chair.
Thank you. So we have two, F1 and F2. I'm just going to put together if everybody's okay. Can I have a mover for Trustee Satori and Trustee Hatfield? All in favor? Thank you.
Madam Chair, is that the item of negotiations?
Yes, both.
Support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Cook. Business arising from the minutes? Oh, sorry. Approval of the minutes. Can't have business arising without the approval. Trustee Sartori and seconder, Trustee Seepkar. All in support? Opposed?
Support.
It's carried. Now we'll go to business arising from the minutes. Business arising from the minutes. No business arising from the minutes. There's no recommendations from the standing committees that I'm aware of. Notices of motion. No notices of motion. I will declare that we are adjourned.
Chair.